Everybody, Real with West, day 3 coming at you, man. Wednesday, of course, we had Wednesday morning Bible study. Go check that out in College Park. And then, of course, we got tonight, 7 p.m. Of course, New York will be eventually transitioning to where we have all our own things. We're currently working towards all of those things. So I encourage you guys, hey, our social media pages, subscribe to those, support those, our YouTube page, our Instagram page, Facebook, because eventually we're going to come on and transition even our stream and everything else on these platforms only. They will eventually come off the Creflo Dollar ministry apps, and we'll be all completely independent. We told you guys it's a new season. We're growing into some things. It's some exciting times for our church, becoming more independent, which means, hey, we're growing. Is the exciting thing about that. So please do that, because eventually you're going to come on here and it'd be like, man, where's the stream? Things like that. So I want you guys to stay connected with us. The other thing, of course, this Saturday, we got our in-person service. We still will be streaming out virtually on all of our usual platforms, but we encourage you to come to Centennial Memorial Temple. You guys have probably already seen announcements and things like that. The address and everything is on our pages here, so go and click on the wall, the links and things like that, and you'll be able to see those information. Doors open at 5 o'clock. Service starts at 6 p.m. It is our 17-year anniversary, so we got some cool things planned out. But most importantly, the coolest thing is we're coming back together. So encourage you guys to continue to connect with us. Come on, if you feel comfortable, bring your face mask. We promise we're going to keep everything sanitized, safe, man. The venue we are using is really on the top tier as far as keeping everybody safe and things like that and gathering. And so we're going to do it fun and safe. But let's get into this week. I'm talking about the perspective of empathy. Now, day 1, we covered perspective. Yesterday, we covered what empathy is. Go back and listen to. For the sake of time, I'm going to jump straight into it. So connect each day. Now when I'm talking about how do we catch empathy, really, and understand perspective and operating it? Well, it's the nature of God. And it's very, very important, because religion, Christianity, when I say religion, presents God in so many different ways that violate this essence of empathy. And it's hard to believe that we walk in empathy and be empathetic if we think God is not empathetic. I think of the scriptures where it said Jesus was human, and he came in Hebrews talking about he can actually easily sympathize and understand every temptation we went through. Now, he didn't violate them because he's God at the end of the day. And that's what was the beauty about. We saw that. Now, we're not. We are of the essence of God. We're the nature of God, but we're flawed. Jesus was absent of that flaw nature. But he also was human just as much. So he put himself ultimately in the place of empathy to be able to understand. And you watch Jesus, who is God in flesh, operate in empathy towards people all through that. Now, that flies in the face, because it banged up against the disciples all the time, where they're like, man, they weren't allowed to stay in the town as they were on to the way to Jerusalem. And they were so mad. And that's where Jesus said, well, man, foxes have home, birds have all this nest, place to nest. They all have a home, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. He was talking about in that specific town. And that was the same town that 2 of his disciples were like, man, should we call fire down just like the Elijah did? And Jesus said, rebuked them both and said, you don't know what spirit you're of. That's not what we're here to do. We'll just go to the next town, guys. And so he was empathetic in that moment. He was compassionate. He was merciful in that moment. The woman caught in adultery, they were about to stone her. He said, well, if you want to use the system, why don't we apply it towards you? What he did, he appealed to their humanity and said, can you not put yourself in her shoes in that moment? And they all were like, man, we'd have to stone all of us in this moment. That's all glimpses of empathy. And we look in 1 John chapter 4, twice it says God is love. And then at the end of that chapter, it talks about we love because he first loved us. So if we don't understand God as empathetic, and I know you're like, what about this scripture? What about that scripture? What about this scripture? What about a bunch of scriptures that a bunch of people operating with a veiled understanding? You have to realize the Bible was written as this constant, that veil, which Moses, that came down, was a representation of, had that veil. And even Paul said he only knew in part. It was a constant unveiling of God, and their understanding of who God was continually growing all the way up. When you read that all the way up to Paul, and it's still growing today, by the way, is what it is. And it was this continuous unveiling. And Jesus, why they have such a problem with Jesus? Because their misperception of God as a God of anger, a God of wrath, God always needing this, needing that, needing this. When God came in and Jesus came in, it was like, no, that's not who I am. That's who you thought I am. That was the dark veil you understand. And that's why the scriptures can seem contradicting, because you got a bunch of human beings, particularly driven male human beings, perspective, that were operating in a veiled version of God. They only knew God in part. So what I'm challenging is to unveil that, to see God in empathy. And now we start viewing that. But if we'll never, as Christians, understand God is truly that empathetic in so many different ways, that God can put ourselves in, he can see us in our, he can put himself in our shoes and see us that, oh, well, we did this, we made these dumb mistakes, but he can see the why and what led up to it and be compassionate towards us. Yeah, challenge us to grow, to mature, to become better and do better in all things, but be empathetic. If we can't see God doing that, we'll never operate in it. And we'll continue down this path of hellfire, damnation, wrath, and judgment. Because why? We think that's who God is. And that's not who God is. I know there's been a lot of presentation. It's been misrepresentation. But that's not who he is. So if we're going to operate in empathy and the perspective of empathy and judge everything from that, we have to stop presenting God outside of that. And when we see something that presents God outside of that in our view, we have to realize we're violating the nature of God and who he really is ultimately. And start letting his nature define the scripture instead of the scripture define his nature all the time. And saying, well, maybe I'm reading that wrong. Maybe I'm looking at that wrong. Or maybe that was written in this context or this time, in this season, in this understanding, in that veiled understanding. And realizing there was people that were writing that knew in part. And understand that this whole thing of reading the Bible was to lead us to this place to realize, man, God is love. And then we can start operating from a place of exploring how much he really does love and how empathetic he really is, and grow and go in that relationship. But you got to disconnect from the past, disconnect from the misteaching, disconnect from the veiled understanding, and really put on this lens of God is empathetic. Now let me go back and revisit all I know and even all the things I don't know, and judge it from the place of empathy, and then start judging everything around us in our world, in our relationships, and ourselves and God from the standpoint and the perspective of empathy. I can't go through all the things, don't have enough time, I'm going to wrap it up right here, but this is to reset the lens so you can look at things different in the world. And man, things will all of a sudden start making a lot more sense. You'll be able to understand things on a whole different level. You'll be able to judge things and be on the right side of things instead of and not, when I say right side, not against or for, nothing like that, but where you're not anti-people and we're not actually showing the love of God, thinking we're honoring God, and we're not at all. Man, God is all about this part about empathy and being able to see humanity and be compassionate, merciful, loving, understanding, because we need it ourselves. And man, you're going to live a lot happier, a lot freer with that when you can do that and be empathetic towards people. All right, we're going to get into more tomorrow and keep this going. But check out day 1, 2. Stick with me all week, man. We're going to have an awesome time in this, and you're going to see things different, see God different. And man, just enjoy being a Christian on a whole different level. All right, guys, catch you tomorrow.